to actually come onto the grounds, take the embassy hostage, and take the diplomats hostage. I mean, this was the worst part of all. It was like being raped.
There were times I was sure that none of us were going to come out of that thing alive, given the volatility of what was going on and their propensity for violence.
It was interminable. 14 and a half months can be an eternity. And I saw no way out.
We have never been comfortable as Americans dealing with religious fervor. We simply do not comprehend it.
We were still in the Cold War. We really weren't looking at Iran most of the time. We were really thinking about what are the Soviets going to do? So to a large degree, we were saying, well, let's try to keep a stable relationship with Iran going. And perhaps we were a little too idealistic about this.
I'll tell you the funniest thing. I woke up that morning, I walked out on my balcony, and I looked out over at the embassy, and I actually said, oh, it's a great day to be alive.
November 4th, 1979 started out as any other day in Iran. That morning, it so happened to be the anniversary of a riot in front of the university, and Iranian students were killed. So there was going to be a march on November 4th, and we figured, well, they were passing by the embassy, then going to the university, which was not far from there.
The hordes were already out there screaming, Mort be America, and death to America. And at first, this demonstration seemed to me to be an interruption, that it was going to really mess us up on getting our timetable down. You know, it's amazing how you don't worry about the right things at the wrong time. And then when it happened very quickly. It started out as a typical demonstration, only instead of just stopping in front of the embassy, these hordes then started to scale the walls.
And literally, as the gate was being pushed open by Iranians, I was running back to the Chancellery building and was the last person allowed into the Chancellery building right as they streamed through the gates, which were by that time broken open. They also at that time began climbing over the walls.
And then a Marine suddenly came down the hall shouting, everybody downstairs, there's a break-in. And I looked out and there was a sea of people coming at the embassy.
I was scheduled that morning to go to the foreign ministry. I took my deputy and one of my security officers along with me.
We had gone down to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that morning to talk to the ministry about embassy security. And we were there in the meeting when my radio goes off, and it is our driver, embassy driver, who's down in our car, who says, you better come down, I need to talk to you. So I go on down and excuse myself from the meeting. Highly unusual for high cost to do that, and go down. He said, we got a problem. The Marines need to talk to you. The embassy's under attack.
It was a hell of a state of affairs. And of course, here I was in the foreign ministry. My compound was way across town. I wasn't there.
Took my coat off and put a flak jacket on, a helmet on, grabbed my shotgun, grabbed my holster and revolver, grabbed a whole supply of ammunition and tear gas.
And my instructions there were not to fire, except if they were an immediate physical threat themselves, danger of loss of life.
We were the first office to be taken over. And my secretary was so frightened that she opened the doors so quickly, there was no way to stop people. blindfolded me. And as soon as that happened, must have been some sort of heavenly sign going on. It started to rain. You know, I'm kind of a dramatic person. I sort of accepted it. You know, this is what life is going to give me. You know, rain, blindfolded. I'm going into hell right now. I don't know what's going to happen to me.
And once we saw the situation sort of deteriorating, we started destroying codes. We started destroying sensitive documents, and just things that we felt should not fall into the hands if the embassy happened to be taken over. They brought our security officer to the vault door, and they said that if we did not open up, they were going to execute him. Well, that's pretty serious.
The decision was made somehow to surrender. Nobody was really in charge, you see. The preparations for, or the anticipation of this just was non-existent.
I, along with everyone else, was scared, very frightened, but even then had a little bit of sense of bravado. I mean, as they came in the communications vault.
Kevin noticed a cassette on the desk, and he rushed back to get that to destroy it.
And as I was stuffing cassette tapes into the shredder, they caught me doing that and wanted me to retrieve them, actually grabbing my arm and pushing my hand into the shredder.
Later to find out it was, I think, an Earth, Wind, and Fire tape of mine. So he risked his life for Earth, Wind, and Fire. They lined us up against the wall, and they sort of put our hands behind our backs, and we were told to keep our heads down.
When they put a gas mask bag over my head to use as a blindfold, that was, I mean, it was pitch dark, and all kinds of thoughts were going through my head at that immediate instant and for the ensuing several hours.
And then led out and downstairs with the guard telling me, you know, where to step, where to put my feet, and then whispering, Vietnam, Vietnam.
And they started to interrogate me. I felt that it doesn't seem like this is going to be a short stay in Hotel Iran.
I was with the CIA guy, and we weren't supposed to talk. He was a little faster off the mark than I was, and he said, "You realize, don't you, we're hostages." And so I thought about that.
I was taken outside, and the hordes were already out there screaming, death to the hostages. So it was like an official, formal announcement that, hey, this isn't your typical sit-in. This is a serious situation. And I'll never forget thinking that, gee, this thing could go on for a day or so, and we're really going to be behind in our work.
We tried to make things difficult for our captors. We sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic, or Rally Round the Flag. I was at Rally Round the Flag, we sang. And you see, we didn't know how to be hostages yet. We hadn't accepted that reality. But our captors didn't know how to be captors.
They were threatening to kill me and my colleagues as well if we didn't open the safes. Russian roulette, interrogation.
What they wanted to know is what documents we had destroyed. They wanted to know the combination of the safe. They wanted to know who we worked for, if I was a spy. They wanted to know just anything that we would tell them.
who controlled this, who was responsible for that. And I particularly felt that that was none of her business. So I said, I had earlier looked around the room, and I had seen a bottle of scotch that the embassy cook had that he should not have had in his drawer. And in my best Persian, I asked her if she wanted a drink. That was just the worst possible thing anybody can do. But I think it was my desire to say, I'm here, I'm not going to be pushed around.
I didn't even have a uniform over there, but they found my military identification card. Then it was Katie bar the door. Oh, you must be CIA, you're a colonel in American Army, you're in a lot of trouble.
I was wakened during the night, that first night, and one of the guards said, "Quit signaling your colleague with your eyes." And I said, "What?" And my eyes must have been moving in rim movements or something, and they were absolutely convinced, I don't know how, in the small darkened room, that I was sending Bill all sorts of secret signals with my eyes. But so we were all blindfolded after that.
It was cold that night. I shared that evening with one of the colonels, the U.S. military attachés. We spoke for several minutes, and we both said, "What are we doing what are we doing here? Why is this happening to us? Perhaps this is a dream that we'll wake up from." Khomeini saw this as a gift. Khomeini was ingenious enough to understand that the takeover of the embassy was a perfect ploy to consolidate power in Iran. By taking over the embassy, he not only destroyed the provisional government of Iran, but he also destroyed the United States' power within Iran. Khomeini saw this as a gift. Khomeini was ingenious enough to understand that the takeover of the embassy was a perfect ploy to consolidate power in Iran. By taking over the embassy, he not only destroyed the provisional government of Iran, but he also destroyed the United States' power within Iran.
The only thing, though, the president said, I don't think it's going to last very long because these are religious people. And, you know, I just trust that they will be kindly and humanitarian and let them go. And I looked at him, I said, Mr. President, I lived 9 years in Muslim countries, and they're not going to let them go tomorrow. I can tell you that.
Around the room, they were situated these guards who were all dressed in black, and they had black hoods with automatic weapons in their hand. And in the farthest corner of the room, there was this French provincial desk with a short man sitting at that desk. They marched me over there, sat me down, and wanted me to write down the history of my infamy. And I refused. I said, nope, I won't do it.
They had 2 or 3 different interrogations teams that worked me over. I was beaten, I was hung by my wrists, marched into trees, and of course with a blindfold on. Sleep deprivation. I was tied so tightly that when they weren't interrogating me, they'd tie me up like a pretzel and come in about every 15 minutes, give me a couple of good swift kicks, pull me to my feet, and ask me a bunch of stupid questions. And that was deliberate. I mean, that was to try to confuse me.
He said to me that I'll count to 10, and by the time I get to 1, if I don't get an answer from you, I'll just shoot you in the head. I won't shoot you in the head, but my friend will shoot. And my friend had his cold barrel next to my head. People don't realize that the count from 10 to 1 can take an interminable period of time when you're about to die or you expect to die. And at the count of 7 or so, I'm saying, now what am I supposed to do here? I want to be a good American, but I want to live too.
I figured I was finished. It was all over. It was just a question of how I was going to go out. And it had nothing to do with loyalty to the United States of America or some patriotic approach to anything. It was just my own personal self-esteem. I was not going to give in.
So it got down to 4, 3, 2, and 1. And then I decided, well, I think the better part of valor in this case is to say that, is to answer as directly as possible whatever needed to be answered without giving the store away.
After about 3.5 weeks, they gave up on me. And that was a very dramatic moment, really. One of the team chiefs of the interrogation teams just got so frustrated and angry with me because I wasn't really giving him any information, and he banged on his desk and said, "You must be the dumbest colonel in the American Army." And I felt so good about that.
Once I said yes, the gun was lifted from my head, and I signed my name, and they sent me back upstairs. I think I was in total shock for days.
From November 4th to March 17th, 1980, we were not allowed to talk to each other. So any information that we received that was passed around had to be done on the sly. It could not be done openly. We couldn't talk, so we didn't know.
We spent days in this place. It was solid darkness, where kind of our lifestyle began. The lifestyle of changing everybody's shirt, wearing other people's pants. We all looked like we were disheveled messes.
We were like animals in a zoo because they would parade people through there to watch us, to look at us. And I don't know if they were charging admission or not, but that was kind of an eerie feeling, you know, to be in a situation like that.
Regularly, we could hear volleys being fired off. And I suspect it was to keep the mob at bay. And they told us, we're protecting you against the mob. But we didn't know, I didn't know whether or not, and in what order, we were being shot consecutively.
No letters, no telephone calls, absolutely nothing at all. And I don't understand what the students fear as far as letting the hostages at least contact their families, let the families know that they are fine and not being hurt.
I want my daddy home. I want my daddy home.
My son never wanted to look at the pictures of his father on television. He had said to my mother, and this was like well into the crisis, you know, didn't they go psh, to Daddy? Wasn't it over? And for a 2-year-old, over is better than having and not having.
I think I could actually visualize time. Seconds were like grains of sand that kind of built up and became minutes, and minutes became hours, and hours became days, and days became weeks, and weeks became months, and much to my chagrin, years became years. I never expected that it was going to last that long.
The relationships did not stand up as well as perhaps they should have. And I think a lot of us, some people irritated the hell out of me, and I irritated the hell out of some other people.
We spent a lot of time just getting to know one another, and eventually, after several weeks, getting to irritate one another. Frankly, when you spend 24 hours a day with somebody, you get on each other's nerves.
I was in a room with a couple other people and had to spend 24 hours a day on a bed. Now that sounds very restful after what I'd gone through before, but it gets a little old, and there was no talking allowed or anything.
We were 3 of us in a double bed. One had almost uncontrollable diarrhea, and the other was a terrible snorer. In fact, I talked to his wife about it afterwards, having shared this guy's bed, and we both did this gesture. I had a bad back at that moment, so I was provided with a chair, and I sat in the chair, and then one of my roommates made it clear they wanted their turn in the chair, so we had these little moments.
Imagine any husband and wife that think they have a good marriage, chain them together and put them in a 5x7 cell for a few months and see what you have left at the end of that. Probably not much, but we didn't have any choices.
We were from different backgrounds, and as another hostage said, we exhausted each other. You could tell the level of fear by the smell that people give off. People really smell when they're afraid. And I remember we were marched into a little room once, and our three of us sat there. The place just stank, that acrid, terrible smell of fear. We thought that this was a waiting room for execution, you see.
4th of February, 1980. That was one of the real low points and yet a high point of the entire experience.
The door burst open, and in came a group of guards with masked on.
Carrying rifles and automatic weapons. We were taken out and lined up against a wall, spread-eagled.
Stripped down to our underwear, and they marched up and down, snapping at the elastic.
And they told us to put our hands up against the walls and not turn around. And they were clicking their little guns behind us.
It was click, click. And those whose Farsi was better than mine recognized the commands for a firing squad.
Hazir Khan, get ready. And then Hadaf show, take aim. And then nothing.
You're thinking about, hey, the next sound you hear would be the bullet entering you.
And then they went back and started the fire commands over again. And they did that for about a 25 or 30-minute period without ever giving the actual command to fire.
February in Tehran, it can be very cold indeed. And the thought occurred to me, being an amateur historian, I remembered that on the day of his execution, which was I think it was early January 1649, King Charles I insisted on wearing a second shirt so that he would not tremble from the cold and people might think he was afraid. So that thought, me shivering away, King Charles I shivering away, both of us being executed.
And I remember one of the military guys just turning around and saying, if you bastards are going to shoot me, then you're going to shoot me front. You're not going to shoot me in the back. And they kept telling him to turn around, and he was quite defiant.
And then they were giggling and laughing. And about that time you thought, well, you sorry bastards, you're just trying to rattle our cages. You're trying to get into our heads.
Finally, we were marched back into our little cells, and I remember letting out a yell of joy. We'd won. We had faced them down. We hadn't shown what used to be called the white feather. And that was important to me.
There wasn't a single soul that pleaded for mercy or begged or let out a single sound. By then, each one of us had made a conscious decision that if we were going to die there, we were not going to beg them or give them one last spectacle over which they could gloat. And so when it was over and we were moved back into our cells, I did some real serious thinking. I thought, hey, you know, you've been in combat. You've been with some pretty neat people, but you've never been with anybody better than these guys.
We were held hostage. We considered ourselves the outside hostages, as opposed to the inside hostages. But of course, our lives were governed by this extraordinary event as much in its way as our family members in Iran.
We set up the organization of FLAG, Family Liaison Action Group. We just felt we had to have an organization through which we could funnel our concerns to the State Department instead of the other way around. college students were throwing dog food at the Iranians. And I said, this is not helpful. I said, well, tell them to tie a yellow ribbon around an oak tree. It just snowballed. It was incredible.
The mother of a hostage found her way to Tehran on an extraordinary personal quest.
It was when I received the one and only letter that I received from Kevin. That was, I believe it was in February, that said that he had made an escape attempt and that he would die trying to escape rather than stay there. And at that point, I just, every maternal instinct within me just told me that I would go. We were taken to the embassy, and I was very frightened, very, very frightened. But I just knew I needed to see Kevin.
One noon hour, they walked into my room and told me that I was going to meet my mom.
It was so awful, and I walked in the room, and they had these television cameras or cameras set up, and there were about 20 Iranians, and they all had guns pointed.
You can imagine how shocked I was when they took me into another room, and there she was.
I embraced him, and I started to cry.
We embraced and we talked. It was very surreal.
And he whispered in my ear that I had to be very careful what I said, because there was this big bowl of roses that was on the table, and he said that was bugged, and that there were microphones all over. So it was like all pretend visit. I mean, my heart was going inside of him. I just knew that I just needed to project my love to him.
I spent a lot of time with my mom talking about my family, my brothers and sisters, talking about my high school sports team. You know, I was only a couple of years out of high school anyway. What was going on with the Milwaukee Brewers ball team and all the other things that were going on back in Wisconsin.
That was probably the worst time that I ever had in my whole life, was to leave. I had 4 younger children back home that I had to go home to, but knowing that I had to leave him behind me and not know what they were going to do to him, it was very, very difficult.
I used to wake up every morning and make myself say, this is ridiculous. These people are stuck with us. We're stuck with them. They don't know what to do with us. And that kind of cheered me up momentarily as I woke up after another dreary day and night.
And sometimes they'd sit there for hours asking me about the states and things like that. And, I mean, some of them were so naive. They'd say, do you think when this thing's over, do you think I could go to school in the States? Oh, sure. You know, when's it going to be over?
I had deep and utter hatred for them. And they had mutual hatred for me. And I think it was built on the fact that I felt that I was betrayed by them. And they treated us so inhumanely. And I always had this picture of Iranians being not that way.
I don't agree with what they did. But on the other hand, they managed to keep us alive throughout that entire period, and I don't think they did that bad a job.
When we finally got into Comité prison, that was another low point in that sense, because, geez, how long is this thing going to go on? Here we are, where they're institutionalizing this thing to the point where we're going into one of the toughest prisons in the country.
We spent 6 months in an Iranian prison, full-fledged, honest-to-goodness, gray-walled, steel-barred prison with good steel doors to it. And you lie there on the floor with about a half inch of rubber matting, looking at a bulb that's on 24 hours a day, with nothing to do in your life except to go to the bathroom.
This blood-curdling scream just came out of no place. There were 4 of us in this cell, and we all woke up and looked at each other. That was probably the second most frightening day of my life, because someone was being tortured, and this went on 24 hours a day.
Iranians had blocked up all the windows. There was a fan with louvers, and the louver and the fan somehow, and the light from the sun reflected a tree that was outside the building. And there, on this tree, was a bird. And this bird would visit me every afternoon at a certain time. He was upside down, of course, because of the reflection and refraction. And there we were together. He was chirping, and I was looking. We had nothing. That's all we had together. That was our relationship. But that what gave me the most pleasure, I would say, in the 14 and a half months of my captivity. That's not much, you have to understand, but it meant a lot. He meant a lot to me. And then when he left one day and didn't come back, I was heartbroken. When the Algerian diplomats came to see us, I thought that something was going on here. We were transported from a prison to a very nice, comfortable, more or less comfortable place. I think it was a propaganda move on the Iranian part so that the Algerians wouldn't really see what type of lifestyle we were living in.
We had our little cursory physicals, and they brought me in a newspaper, you know, sort of like, hey, it hasn't been that bad, has it? You know, haven't you really enjoyed this? You know, oh, sure.
The Iranians came in, dragged us into a room where we were videotaped and told to tell the videotape how well we were treated.
There's going to be a lot of propaganda on what has happened to you here, and they want to direct it in such a way to show to everyone that, for example, you've been brainwashed, you've been tortured, you've been bothered. You have been brainwashed?
No, we haven't. And when I get to wherever we're going to be going after here, I'm just going to tell it realistic, like it was.
They wanted me to make a statement saying that my stay with them had been very pleasant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I told them, I says, look, I don't care, and these are my exact words, I don't care if you had kept me in the Tehran Hilton with dancing girls. You still kept me against my will.
One of the guards came in and said, all right, let's go. And we said, where? He said, you're going home. And nobody looked at anybody else.
They had never said they were going to take us home before, but we had been moved often enough that we were very, very suspicious. And so we took as much with us as we could.
I said, tell you what, I'm going to pack my bag here. I'm an American diplomat, and I'm not leaving here looking the way I look now. I came in here wearing a suit. I want you to, in shoes, they'd taken my shoes away from me quite a while ago. And I said, I want you to go find me my suit and my shoes, and then I will be ready to go.
And we were taken outside blindfolded, led to a bus. I did not know whether we were going to yet another prison or if we were indeed going to the airport.
Well, that trip to the airport could have been a very fateful one, was a very nervous one. There were elements out there within the student group that were determined not to let us go, hold on to this political bag that they were enjoying, if you will.
The bus was driven through the streets of Tehran.
We sat there, it seemed like an interminable period of time, traveling on bumpy roads.
One of the guards from the bus said, "Shut up." And then in Persian he said, Amérikai, which means you bastard American. So in Persian I just told him to shut up himself, you son of an Iranian whore. And he took umbrage. They hauled me off the bus, beat me up a bit, and the bus left. And there I was, realizing I had probably made a mistake.
The only thing really downhill in Tehran and out in the distance is the airport. And we heard the jet engines of the planes that later would be flying us to freedom. We heard, as we drove nearer to the plane, a more deafening noise even than the aircraft engines, and that was the crowd.
One of the dreams that I used to dream was being released. So I had actually gone to the airport. I had gone through this many times in my dreams.
At the speed of light, I remember running through what was a gauntlet. People pushing at us, throwing things, kicking at us, spitting on us, jeering at us. Yankee, go home.
They were yelling Magbar America, death to America. And at the same time, they were spitting at me. So as I lifted the spit off my face, I happened to see this wave, someone waving at me, and it happened to be an Algerian steward. But to me, it looked like someone saying, you know, you're free.
It just adds some joy to see everyone again.
And we each basically ran into each other's arms and we hugged each other. We were shaking hands. There were tears streaming down faces.
And we started to hug each other and kiss and cry. This feeling of overwhelming joy that one only experiences a few times in one's life.
Everybody was trying to remember people's names. It was like a college reunion because we hadn't known each other that well to begin with. And people slapping each other on the back.
Tremendous. It was party time. It really was. We talked a mile a minute. I was trying to catch up on how one had been treated and what was happening, and everybody had two questions. Are you okay, and is everybody here?
I went out in a Mercedes-Benz, sitting in the back seat with a Revolutionary Guard chauffeur and another guard in front, all the way out to the airport by Mercedes. It's the only way to leave.
There was a lot of apprehension during that time we were still in Iranian airspace that a wild Iranian aircraft fighter pilot would turn his jet on our plane.
And the Algerian captain said, "We're now leaving Iranian airspace." And at that time, I felt that we were free. But it still could have been a dream.
We were given quite a decent Veuve Clicquot. And it was a very private moment. I drank a toast to myself.
Germany was sort of like every happy Christmas you ever had.
I got to Wiesbaden not knowing anything about the emotion that people in America felt. I had no idea.
I called directly home to Barbara and the kids. It was one of these things that, you know, how do you really communicate this feeling of love and loss to someone from this distance and this time warp, the time that we lost, that both of us lost. It's almost an impossible thing.
What do you say over the telephone? Hello, how are you? You know, a stupid question. What do you mean? How am I? Now I'm happy. You know, I was in Iran, and it was terrible. And it's, how much can you say?
I finally got to Louisa. She'd gone to stay with friends because the pressure of TV and all that was getting to be too much. And she said I had to leave my house and go stay with these friends. And I said, what do you mean your house? I paid for that house. And marriage was off to a good start again.
All of us respectful of the fact that here was the previous president of the United States just out of office. We owed him enormous respect. And we also, many of us, however, sensed that here was the man who in effect had contributed to our situation, or at least was responsible for our situation.
Undoubtedly, we cost him his presidency, but I know when he said to me personally that he would rather have me alive than being president of the United States, that he really meant it.
Carter expected to be thanked for getting us out, and we just knew him as the man who'd gotten us in. Having said that, and I really want to make this point, I think we owe our lives to Jimmy Carter.
We'd all been collectively holding our breath for so long that this was just a mighty, it's over.
I remember embracing Bruce and how thin he was. He was like, just had lost so much weight. It was like holding on to a boy, you know.
And when he came off the plane and he just, you know, held us all, well, three of us, and everybody's standing there crying because there are no words.
It was like having a bath in love.
There was a time when Iran had to reassert itself and be Iran, and we were a vehicle for that. We've got to realize that out there are a lot of people who don't wish us well. And that's very important thought at all times, and one that Americans have a very hard time swallowing.
دوست عزیز، تحقیق، ترجمه و روشنگری از ما، زمان لازم، ماه‌ها کار سخت. کمک به انتشار بین بقیه ایرانیان، به اشتراک گذاشتن، لایک، سابسکرایب از شما. زمان لازم 27 ثانیه.